Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Kaye. I'm Dr. Kaye Whitehead. I'm the National President for the Association for the Study of African American Life History for ASALH. I've been thinking a lot about what we should be doing at this moment and how we go forward. And what is important for me is to make sure that people understand that we are in the middle of a very serious fight. It is a fight to save democracy. It's a fight to hold on to our rights. It's not just a fight for one community. This fight is for all of us. And we have to start with what is going on now. I want to talk about what is happening in Minnesota and use Minnesota as a lens through which to talk about this bigger struggle that we're having. I invited three folks to join me tonight. I want to introduce them, bring them onto the stage, and get the conversation going. I also want to invite you to put comments up in the chat, put your questions up in the chat, and we'll get to as many questions as possible. I want to start with Dr. Walter Grayson. He's a professor of history at Macalester College of St. Paul. Dr. Walter, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
We're also joined by Dr. Uhuru. I'm really happy to have you. Dr. Uhuru Williams is a professor of history from the University of St. Thomas, St. Paul. Dr. Uhuru, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to see you, Kaye.
And yes, good to see you as well. And I'm also joined by Tanya Clayhouse. She is the CEO of Clayhouse Consultant and a senior strategist from the African American Policy Forum. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to start by stepping back. I do think we need to use Walter, the Sankofa model, where we have to look back so that we can go forward. Because I think if we start at this moment, people really don't understand that we're looking at the roots of white supremacy. We're looking at what does it mean to argue around the essential question of who does America belong to? And we're looking at this intentional whitewashing that has been happening in our country since we got here. It has never stopped. Sometimes it goes underground. Sometimes we're able to beat it back. But every time we take our eye off of it, the flames just get higher. What does it mean to be at this moment? So I'm going to come to you first, Uhuru. You were in Minnesota, which has been ground zero before we were dealing with this fight for democracy. I'm thinking back to the murder, the very public murder of George Floyd. I mean, that's when everyone's attention turned to Minnesota. We started talking about Minnesota. This is a whole different conversation than thinking about Prince, but thinking about, like, what does it mean to be on the ground organized? And we saw that with the people of Minnesota and the way you amplified what I call Black Lives Matter 2.0. With Black Lives Matter 1.0, we were talking about Trayvon Martin, we were talking about Tamir Rice, we were talking about Mike Brown, and then things died down with 1.0 and COVID-19. And then, of course, here comes George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And we then refocus our energies on what I call that kind of second part of Black Lives Matter. So can you take us back, Uhuru, to help us understand how did Minnesota once again become ground zero?
It's a great framing, Dr. Kaye, because that Black Lives Matter 2.0 really also was a moment when you had this opportunity for the conversation about the movement for Black lives to then take on this fundamental question of white supremacy and the ways in which white supremacy was impacting that conversation and this broader discussion about the very architecture of our democratic republic. And I say that because essentially what's happening now, and this has really been the case since the murder of George Floyd, is this conversation that we've been having nationally and this effort by the Trump administration to redefine the value proposition of the American enterprise and to redefine it around this model that begins with this idea that this is a white Christian nation, that white Christian nationalism is the foundation of our union, and that the 14th Amendment and this idea of a liberal democracy where Americans are united by values was a swindle. As a writer in the New York Times put it. And so Trump has kind of proposed that. And the murder of George Floyd was an important touchstone in that moment, because in that moment in 2020, there was this opportunity to revisit whether, as a democratic republic, we were going to fight to achieve not the articulated ideals, but the aspirational values and ideals that we find in our founding documents. think Congressman John Lewis perhaps put it best in July of 2020 when he wrote that piece that animated so many people when he talked about together we can redeem the soul of America. Everybody read the part about getting in good trouble, necessary trouble, but they missed the part where John Lewis said, the way that ordinary people develop that extraordinary vision is through the study of history. And Black history has been at the center of this conversation in three very tangible ways I'll mention quickly, and I'm sure Dr. Grayson will be able to on. Number one, there's this conversation about birthright citizenship. That's the 14th Amendment. So a lot of this Trump playbook is predicated on eradicating the foundations of liberty, the second American Revolution that we associate with the 14th Amendment, this transformational document that really redefined the republic that came out of the Civil War and Reconstruction. And fundamentally at the heart of that was the question of how do you ensure absolute equality before the law, not just for Black Americans, but for all persons born and naturalized in the United States. So our history is absolutely essential to this. Number two, this fundamental question that's associated with the movement for Black lives about the extent of police power and the ways in which police power has been utilized in this country to not only police communities of color, but now as we're watching what's playing out in Minnesota and other places, this warning, this stark warning that Black history is offered, this stark warning that Black studies is offered, has argued about the extension of police power in ways that ultimately would be corrosive to the democratic process, to the democratic republic, if people did not check what was happening in the Black community specifically. So when people saw that 9.5-minute video of Derek Chauvin with his knee on George Floyd's neck and weren't moved to action and understanding that there but for the grace of God, if that goes unchecked, that power could be amplified and wielded by the state in ways that could also be turned against them. They missed that point, and now we find ourselves here. And the third that I think is very important for people to kind of lean into is that we're also talking about a playbook that was developed by, in many ways, Black activists and their allies to deal with Jim Crow segregation, to deal with the denial of basic rights to people of color in this country, specifically Black Americans. And what we're seeing now, although we're all hopeful and optimistic about the expression that we saw here in Minnesota on Friday, the massive march, that playbook may be out of date. And it might be time for us to revisit the ways in which we engage, because in this moment, it appears that the Trump administration essentially studied our playbook. And the reason that Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities was chosen, Minnesota was targeted, is because they are really running a reverse Birmingham on us. It was almost as if what we saw in Los Angeles, what we saw in Chicago was a dress rehearsal for what we've witnessed here in the Twin Cities since Operation Surge began in December. And this is an effort on the part of the Trump administration through political theater and raw terror to demonstrate his willingness, this administration's willingness to use power, wield power in a way that is not only a denial of fundamental human rights, but immoral.
Thank you so much, Uhuru. Yes, that was excellent, the way you put that. I'm going to go to Walter next, because I think you laid out a couple of things that made me start thinking about Afrofuturism, Walter, about what does it mean to imagine a space of liberation? What does it mean that in order to get liberated, you actually have to begin to imagine yourself already existing in that space? So if you could talk a little bit about Operation Surge, because Operation Surge didn't just start with the horrible murder of Renee Nicole Good, but that's when everyone's attention turned there. Kind of lay back the groundwork, because you've been sending out this flag for months now saying, take a look at what's happening here. This is the groundwork. This is the practice ground for how they're looking to go forward.
Dr. Kaye, I have to acknowledge off the jump that you have been paying attention to these issues for so many years, and your scholarship, your leadership has opened the door. We were first having these conversations along with Zebulon Maletsky and the T. Thomas Fortune Cultural Center in Red Bank prior to the 2020 election. So you have done this work for a long time, and I am very grateful to be here with you to continue the conversation. On a few points, when you talk about the envisioning of Afrofuturism, that's been the revelation for me here in Minnesota, is since I received the word from community contacts about the shooting of Renee Good. From that moment forward, every hour, my phone, I get dozens of text messages from networks I'm connected to here through St. Paul and through the college. And so that work is the embodiment of Dr. King's dream, this beloved community that he imagined 2 generations ago. That is an Afrofuturist vision. It's a way of looking at the future where we relate to each other differently. And Dr. King calls for this. He says that we need to have a moral revolution, a revolution of our soul that actually helps us connect to each other more deeply and with love as the core governing principle. That's the most inspiring piece of what's happening in Minnesota right now, is the way that people care for each other, the way that we're looking out for each other, the way that we stand on top of these people attempting to tear us apart and say, no, you won't go any further. We are going to use every tool at our disposal to stop you. Can you imagine a reverse Birmingham back in the middle of the 1960s with instead of Bull Connor attempting to terrorize Dr. King, him standing shoulder by shoulder and turning against the Klan? That's what Minnesota is in this moment, where you're having authorities, and I can't emphasize enough, to have Tim Walz as governor, to have we have Keith Ellison as the attorney general. We have these extraordinary people in elected leadership that would have never been possible in previous generations. And we are an indicator of the future of not just the United States, but the world, where people come together around principle and build beloved community wherever we are. But I have to give a couple notes, just suggestions and additional pieces that are really important on Dr. Williams's points, is that this notion of equality that's embedded in the 14th Amendment. This is a huge legal transformation in the United States. It's bigger than the abolition of slavery. It's bigger than deciding that people enjoy equal access to the vote in the 15th and the 19th Amendments. Equal as a single word in the Constitution only applied to the states before you have the 14th Amendment. There's this no notion of individual equality and that all citizens share in the promise of equality. And so to get that 14th Amendment and to get the protections that flow out from it over the 20th century, it is the fulfillment of the Declaration of Independence, where we say all men are created equal. The 14th Amendment promises individual equality protected by the federal government. And that's what has been inverted by this administration, is that they're attempting to undo the principle that we bled for, that this nation nearly died for between 1861 and 1865. And that's the other piece of this, is that from the very beginning, when we began to see these troops being installed in the state, it struck me as the opposite of what happened at Fort Sumter in the spring of 1861, when the state of South Carolina chose to attack federal troops and take a federal base from them. This is the opposite, where the federal government has decided to suppress the state and local government and unbelievably call them domestic terrorists, attempt to criminalize them. And so it's not a crisis of secession, Secession. This is a crisis of accession, Accession. We are in an accession crisis where the federal government is attempting to take away the power of a state to be sovereign. And that's the battle. This is, if this works in Minnesota, they'll sweep across the middle of the country, and these battles will play out again in Maryland and New York and in California. This accession crisis is the ability of the federal government to force everyone to comply with Christian nationalism. And that's the risk. And it's going to get worse in terms of violence. We are seeing people being killed in the street, but there is fundamentally a disrespect for our humanity and our ability to self-govern. And that's what we have to beat back as a united people everywhere. The general strike was historic on Friday. It is so important that we take that step, but it's got to grow. And that's why it's so important that we're here together in conversation tonight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you laying it out for us. Before I give the mic to Tanya, I want to come back to Uhuru for a second, because I don't think we can go forward without mentioning Nikema Armstrong. Like, I want to lift this sister up. I mean, she has been deeply involved in the struggle, having, of course, been in charge of the NAACP there. And she was recently arrested for the work she did to call out someone working for ICE and trying to lead a church, like calling out the enemy by name. And when they arrested her, of course, the White House doctored a picture of her, because that's what fascism does, right? You look to control the media. So we have the real image of her being arrested, standing tall, understand what is happening, and then the picture they release where they wanted her to look broken and wanted her to look like they had completely beaten her down. Can you talk a little bit about Nekima and, like, let's just bring her name into this space?
She's a very important activist and defender of our community, and she has been for a very long time. And so when the circumstances happened the other day, when she was detained, arrested for supposedly disrupting that church service, no one here was surprised, because this is but what Nekima Levy Armstrong has done in this community for a long time. In fact, I had an opportunity to work with her in 2022 after the killing of Amir Locke, and a lot of people will remember in that moment, she challenged Mayor Jacob Fry and the then interim police chief in a press conference where they were basically sharing a narrative about how Amir Locke was killed that she disagreed with. And she spoke up in that moment and said, I'm not going to participate in this cover up or this whitewashing. I joined this work because I believe that you were sincere in wanting to make meaningful change. And so I'm going to call you out. But even that moment isn't how people in this community understand Nekima. They understand her as someone who's been deeply committed to civil rights and racial justice and equality in this community. It wasn't just the movement for Black Lives. So when she and her colleagues in the Racial Justice Network began becoming very active in this pushback against ICE, that's just an extension of this deeper commitment to values and to justice and to equality. And the last thing I'll say is that the doctored photo that you spoke to, again, anyone who knows her in this community, we were colleagues at the University of St. Thomas. She gave up that position to be engaged in full-time civil rights activism in this community. She, at one point, even before the George Floyd protest, but during the protest around Philando Castile and Jamar Clark and other men of color who were killed in this community, took steps that, to me, demonstrate her level of courage, including at one point marching out on the highway, the interstate with others, to shut down the highway to dramatize what was happening to people of color in this community, Black people in this community. So anyone who paints, this is a fearless sister. Painting tears on her face in no way is indicative of who she is as a person. It's just a pathetic and weak attempt by this administration to use propaganda to denigrate and degrade the work of this very powerful, very courageous activist. For an administrator, for someone like Trump to claim he stopped 8 wars, the reality is he couldn't stop 2 sisters. And I think we can celebrate Nekima for her courage, but then also the other women and men who were involved in that protest and who've been at the forefront of pushing back against ICE's presence in our community.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. I'm happy to say that we've been joined by Minnesota State Representative Huda Mamanyi Hitsley. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and please let me know if I'm not. Thank you. I'm so happy about that. I worked on that. So I'm so glad you've joined us, because I really want to have you in here as a representative to help us to frame what is happening, because you have what we call, the bird's eye view. When I have politicians on my show, I'm like, those of us who are activists, we are ants eye view. We're looking at what's happening and how we can disrupt and get our agenda across. As a politician, as someone who's been elected, you're looking at everything and trying to figure out what policies are in place and what does a struggle look like. This is an interesting time to be elected, because you have both what's happening with your governor and how your governor is standing up, and we did not expect anything different from Governor Walz, but we have this intense pressure coming from the federal government. So can you help us to frame what is happening from your perspective as an elected official?
Thank you so much. And let me first of all apologize for being late. I didn't realize the time zones, and my son will be popping in and out because the daycare that I had arranged for this meeting fell through. So as a mother and as a working mom, he's going to be popping in and out. And so I'm going to try my best to be able to, have this very important conversation. So first of all, I have to acknowledge, what our governor is doing. unless you understand the magnitude of this space and of this moment. Hi, Baba. Okay, just give us a second, baby. Okay, it's easy to make assumptions about or expectations about what our governor should, and I think what we are seeing is him putting his foot down and fighting for all Minnesotans, right, within his power, you know. And oh my goodness, and all the decisions that he has to make, you know, he has to you know, weigh the pros and cons of that. And believe me, as legislators, we have been very much involved in the process in terms of, you know, pushing him in one way or another, because we also want to represent our own constituencies. But he has to make that decision based on, you know, the risk level, right? We're not even talking about outcomes right now. He's literally looking at the risk. If I make this decision, what is the risk on our, you know, our residents here in the state of Minnesota? If I do this, if I put the National, you know, Guard on the ground, you know, is that going to give this president, you know, what he needs to enact the Insurrection Act? Right. And so right now, I have to applaud our governor for everything that he's doing, and obviously our AG as well for doing everything he can too, you know, using every tool in his arsenal, you know, filing all these lawsuits, and also our the Minnesotans, our people, you know, what they're doing to make sure that they don't give this administration any reason to, you know, put any authority on the state of Minnesota. And so it's been a very interesting and challenging times. We have many conversations with the governor as a legislator, and we are sitting here saying, hey, this is what our people and our constituencies are telling us. But at the same time, we also understand that he's in a very difficult space, and he's doing his best to make sure that whatever decision he's making, it's in the best interest of all Minnesotans.
That I want to come to Tanya because Tanya Clayhouse is a senior strategist for AAPF, also worked in the Obama administration. So Tanya knows what it's like to sit at the table when the president, the federal government, makes decisions that will impact everyone, like the weight of that. So Tanya, can you help frame this for us of what does it mean to have this intense pressure? It is not as if Governor Walz is not in a fight for not just the future of Minnesota, but he's also laying out the place for other Democratic governors who are standing up to the federal government and what you can possibly get as a result of standing up.
Right. Well, thank you again for having this important conversation. And I want to say, as a working mother myself, I completely empathize with what you're doing with having no daycare. So, because it's, you know, it's the life that we all live. So I think it's pretty critical to understand that the federal government, I mean, I've been thinking about, you know, how have we gotten to this point, and how is it that we are now actually at a point where we don't trust the words that are coming out of the officials, of the mouths of the officials of the federal government. We are having to actually document and having to have video and ensuring that we have other information, because there's a challenge, as if we are being gaslit about what we are actually visually seeing from our own eyes. And as someone who is, as you said, sat in U.S. government and had to make sure that whatever it is that we were doing, as I was at the table with secretary, with, you know, the chief of staff, with as coordinating with the Department of Justice on different, just whatever it was, that we knew that what came out from the federal government, it's the bully pulpit. I mean, there is an ability for the government to actually control and have access and to be able to define and discern what is going to occur throughout even though it's through federal law, there's an ability to be able to define how things are going to proceed, obviously under the Constitution, and have a consistency across the states. And that we recognize that there was obviously that the rights that the states have, particularly when it comes to, that the rights that the states have are distinct, yet the federal government has a certain capacity that we understood was very powerful and is very powerful. And so what is happening right now within the states in which it's essentially, we're upside down, in which we are now fighting against the very government in which we actually used to go to and would rely upon, particularly when we're trying to ensure and protect our civil rights. Now we're on the flip end in which we're actually fighting against a government in order to protect our civil rights. The states are now having to reassert and assert their rights to sovereignty and to reassert their state laws and to reassert their human rights laws in order to ensure that the federal government does not actually follow suit and actually protects the rights of citizens both on the federal and state level. So it is pretty, I don't even know how to describe fully how unprecedented this is right now, in which we're fighting against this regime, essentially, in which they are actually not abiding by the standard practices. And there's no, I don't know that you can continually say how many times you can say how unprecedented this is, but it is, in which we're having to fight against. I mean, you have to actually go into court to ensure that the federal government is not to get a temporary restraining order to ensure the federal government is protecting the evidence, so that the states can actually have a proper investigation. That is unheard of. And that is something that I never in my lifetime thought I would be having to talk about and having to see. So that is something that we're having to deal with right now. And it's a shame, because that is actually eroding the confidence right now that anyone would have. The deep state that this administration claims that exists, they're actually creating it, and they're doing disservice. They're creating that by creating a situation in which no one now actually believes what is coming out of the mouths of our federal officials. And that is really undermining the base, the fundamentals that we have secured and that we have within our Constitution, and that everybody believes that we have within it, particularly, as to ensure that you actually have rights, due process rights for life, liberty, and justice, and be free expression. That is something right now that we're having to maintain, and it's particularly challenging to see that as someone who has actually had to sit there and watch and understand how this all interacts between the federal government and the states.
Thank you so much, Tanya. So we use the words unprecedented. We say historic. We say never happened before, except Uhuru. I did some things down earlier today. I said, I actually haven't slept well in this country since I saw the picture of Mike Brown's body laying in the street. I have heard about state-sanctioned violence. Of course, I've seen videos, but there was something about that moment that they did not render aid, that he's laying there like an animal on the street. They let him just bleed out. And then I went back to my mother. And I asked her, what was that moment for her? Like when she said she stopped sleeping well. She said the moment for her was when she saw the picture of Dr. King's body on that balcony after he was shot and killed, because that picture went around the world. We then thought about my Nana, because my Nana said the same thing years ago when she was still with us, about what it was like for them to see open casket of Emmett Till on the cover of Jet magazine. And then I went all the way back to something that my great-grandmother said. Both of them, may they rest in peace and power, well-deserved rest. But I remember my great-grandmother said that she stopped sleeping when the Klan shot and killed her father in the doorway of our family home. I bring that up because you're talking from my great-grandmother to me. I probably can go farther back. I'm just getting with the research I have. State-sanctioned violence is a part of our lives. So watching the murder of Renee Nicole Good, how horrible that was, Mr. President, it did not surprise me in a system that actually enjoys
meting out violence so they can make us afraid. They lynched Black men and then drove their body around town so everyone else can take the warning. So can you talk a little bit about how they're almost like enjoying this moment of our fear and concern and consternation?
So glad you raised that, Dr. K, because I think we can honestly talk about the epigenetic harm we suffer in our community as a result of this post-traumatic stress that's expressed in our genes in terms of these long-standing encounters with state-sanctioned violence, personal violence as Black people that's gone unpunished. And that's the critical piece of this. There is the insult and injury in the assault on the body of the person who's victimized. And then there is the compounding harm, which is done to the family and the community of never having justice for that person so aggrieved. I think about when Maxine Waters came to this community and was chastised in the aftermath of, or just before the Chauvin verdict, when Dante Wright was killed. And people were upset, including the judge in the Chauvin trial, because they believed that Maxine Waters' comments might prejudice the jury when she said that people needed to get in and stay in the streets. And people were asking, why is Maxine Waters from California? What's she doing in Minneapolis? Why is she talking about this? Well, people forget that in 1979, as a young assemblywoman, Maxine Waters had taken up the case of Eula May Love, who was killed over a $20 or $66, as Daryl Gates put it, energy bill. This whole question of Black people being killed and there being no accountability is something that we talked about. And when Counselor Tanya says, look, when we look at this through the lens of how in our community in particular, that lack of accountability is then expressed in us feeling gaslit, that the provisions of the 14th Amendment that came out of the Civil War Reconstruction that were meant to ensure absolute equality before the law for Black folks don't apply to Black folks. No privileges and immunities, a fundamental denial of citizenship in terms of accountability, and no equal protection under the laws, then the names themselves in those stories become part of that compounding harm. It isn't just Emmett Till. It is Yusef Hawkins. It is James Byrd. It is a litany of people whose names become less familiar to us. But then as we are presented with a George Floyd or a Jamar Clark, there's this opportunity for people then to share in the way that you're talking about, Dr. K, and to remember. So, you know, I would always say I grew up in the shadow of my parents grew up in the shadow of Emmett Till. I grew up in the shadow of Yusef Hawkins. My son grew up in the shadow of James Byrd in Jasper, Texas. And my daughters grow up in the shadow of Ronette Taylor and Sandra Bland and Michael Brown. And for us, that epigenetic harm becomes a part of the basis of the stories that we tell. Wounds produce narratives. And in our community, that wound expressed is our identification with this state-sanctioned violence on people in our community. And that warning that we've made consistently about, and if you're not careful, eventually this is going to come back and affect you. I think about the Niagara movement and their Declaration of Sentiments from 1905 saying, we pray God that this nation founded on liberty will not degenerate into a mob of boasters and oppressors, and will return to the faith of the fathers that all men are created equal. So even in that moment, the men and women of the Niagara movement are trying to remind America to live up to its values, to live up to its ideals, understanding that in that moment, part of what drew them together was the violence, the lynching, the race riots, and the lack of accountability. So I think it's important for us to highlight that. It's, for me, in this moment in particular, as we think about a Renee Nicole Good or an Alex Prevetti, that it's this reminder in some sense of what happened during the civil rights movement when you had Schwerner, Chaney, and Goodman who were murdered. And it was the death of the two civil rights workers that actually then captured the attention of the nation. And it took Rita Schwerner to say, you know, when Black folks go missing in Mississippi, this isn't an issue. And I'm happy the White House contacted myself and my family to express grief, but what about James Chaney? It's the same thing with Viola Luizu or James Reeb and Selma. And we celebrate those people as allies, but we also understand, as Dr. Grayson alluded to earlier, that we also as a community understand that in and of itself is an affirmation of what Langston Hughes said when he said, America was never America to me, because that accountability has never been there. And in this moment in particular, when we were moving toward that, or at least there was this hope post George Floyd, that we were going to get a George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And then not only did we not get that, but the American people re-elect Donald Trump, and then he takes sadistic pleasure in then pulling away at the last moment the opportunity for a consent decree here in Minneapolis and other communities, saying he wants to take the handcuffs off police, celebrating someone like a Kyle Rittenhouse. That, I agree with you, is the ultimate, not just gaslighting, but celebration of terror against communities of color, which we know intimately.
Thank you so much, Dr. Uhuru. I'm going to come to you, Dr. Walter, and after that, I'm going to come to Tanya to talk a bit about the Fourth Amendment. So I think we lost Dr. Walter. So Tanya, I'll come to you first. One of the things that we are talking about when we look at ICE, because we're now turning to segment 2. Segment 1 laid it out for us historically. How did we get here? We're now at a point where we've got to figure out, how do we get out of it? So, Walter, since you're back, we know that people have been looking at Minneapolis for the past few weeks. I mean, we are watching what is happening on the ground. And I don't know how many times, Walter, over the years, we've said, look, Black folks, we need to do an economic shutdown. Don't go to work. Don't buy anything. Get out in the streets. Now, we've done a good job boycotting Target, but there was something very powerful to see everybody out. I talked about it on my radio show, and I said, I watched the adults, but something struck me watching 4- and 5-year-old kids in minus 15-degree weather. Now, I know Minnesotans are built differently. In Baltimore, I mean, I'm from the South. We have very soft blood here when it comes to cold weather, but it was the show of strength saying that nobody's going to go to work. Nobody's going to get off point. We are all doing this together. They can try to steal our rights, but if we stand together as a community, as a nation, we can remind those elected folks that there's a fourth branch of government, which is we the people. So I want to have you talk about the power of mobilization and how we can take that same spirit into other communities.
Love it. Thank you so much. And this is the thing I really wanted to be on this conversation for this evening. I can do the history for hours on end. And I will start with a brief note. A good colleague of mine named William Carrigan wrote a book called The Making of a Lynching Culture. And it talked exactly about what people are taught to do. White Americans were taught to celebrate violence against immigrants, against Black people, against women. And this manifests here in Minneapolis in a really deep and profound way, because this is part of the basis of the Dred Scott case. And you have the Supreme Court with Roger Taney make a statement that Black people have no rights that a white person is bound to respect. We've moved into this moment now where we see that if you are in a blue city, if you believe in freedom and democracy for all people, you, whether you're Alex or whether you're Renee or any of us in this meeting, we have no rights that the Trump and this federal paramilitary force is bound to respect. And they say this openly every day, that we will do what we like and we have impunity, we have immunity from any kind of consequence or accountability. But the opposite of that is what has happened. The organizing that is happening, especially among young adults, folks under the age of 35, folks under the age of 25, who are the infrastructure across all of the cities in Minnesota that are organized. It's not just Minneapolis or St. Paul. It's St. Cloud. It's Bemidji. It's Duluth. This state is full of these communities that are under assault. But it's the young people who are quietly getting together in their homes and saying, this is what we're doing tomorrow. I'm going to make sure the food gets where it needs to be. I'm going to make sure the medicine gets where it needs to be. I'm going to be out with my camera. I'm going to ride around. I'm going to make sure I get license plate numbers. That level of dedicated activism, again, this was not common when we look back to the time of Dr. King and the civil rights struggle across the South. To have the infrastructure of immigrant communities, white communities, youth communities stepping up and communicating and saying that they're holding each other accountable, that's the victory. That is what, as African Americans, we have demanded for decades and centuries, that it's not just a few white abolitionists, that there is a mass movement for justice among all people in this country. And that's what's happening right now. Of course, The drama over the last 3 weeks has been about escalating the response, the repression of that kind of solidarity. But they're failing. They're failing dramatically. So I've spent most of the first week after the killing of Renee Good building solidarity here in the States so that we can have a multi-city response. Frankly, so that when we got to the general strike on the 23rd, that we were seeing hundreds of cities participating in that general strike. It was deepest and most profound here in Minnesota, but we had solidarity across the United States. And now we're at the stage where we're seeing folks in Canada rallying to our defense, folks across Europe and Asia rallying to our defense. This is something that has catalyzed a global movement for justice that's unparalleled. That, if you want to talk about unprecedented, we are on the brink of building the better world that we've been fighting for our whole lives. And so that's why I'm really excited. That was been my struggle personally, to work with the AG's office, to work with the folks in the governor's office, to get my local city council people to be responsive right away in the aftermath of January 7th. And then to then build that out so that I was talking to folks in California, talking to folks in New York and Maryland. My next move is to go into the South and start to organize across the Black Belt. This infrastructure is going to let us build the world that we thought we could have built under Barack Obama and that coalition back in 2009. But we're going to take it much further and really lay the foundation so we never get back to a moment like this again.
Dr. Walter. So I want to come back to the representative because I will be very honest and very transparent. I've been screaming at the Democrats, right? So whenever I see them post, I've been watching, Hakeem will post something or, Cory Booker, and I'm like, stop, get off Threads and actually do your job. But then I started to reflect last night. I know we don't have the numbers in Washington, D.C., but it really will only take 23 Republicans to vote with the Democrats to actually stop this. Just 23. So I'm telling people, turn away from your anger with Hakeem and Cory and all of them, and instead let's put pressure on these Republicans in states where they are not completely ruling with the majority. So can you talk about it as a representative? What can our politicians do, and what should we do as constituents to help push our representatives along? You're muted, Representative. There you go.
There we go. Okay, so yes, absolutely. I think the biggest part of that question is reflection and understanding where the real authority lies, right? Again, when we have, folks who, from the perspective of, you're an elected official, you should have the power, and not really understanding where that real power lies, who have the authority to do what. I think a lot of times I've found myself educating folks about, this is, who we can put pressure on. This is the role of the governor. This is the role of the state legislators. This is the role of Congress, right? And so I have been intentional about educating our community about, who does what and what jurisdiction lies where. So I'll start off with our community. Obviously we've talked about how our community in the state of Minnesota has, come forward in powerful ways, mobilizing, organizing, and we as a community still have the real power, even when the federal enforcement feels overwhelming, right? Neighbors can still stay informed and share accurate, know your right information. Look out for one another as we continue to do, verify, enforcement activities before spreading panic, right? And support rapid response efforts, initiatives, and legal aid groups that help families in real time. And we've continuously seen how Minnesota has come together in a real time, mobilizing groups and mobilizing different waves of supporting one another, and we're showing up peacefully, and that has always been our message. I was with Dr. Yahuru yesterday with NAACP press conference, and we kept on preaching about, this peaceful, showing up of protests, having town halls and so forth. But I think going into the second part of your question about about, really putting pressure where pressure needs to be, we look at how community can show up, and that is through civic engagement, right? The midterm elections are coming up. What does that look like? And you talk about, how the Democrats are not showing up. I'm gonna be honest, I am a part of the Democratic Party, and we are failing. And from not only from a strategic perspective, but also from a communications and messaging perspective. The other side is very clear about their messaging. It's fraud, it's criminal, it's this, community. But we as Democrats have not come out strong and said, this is our message, this is what we're trying to do, and this is how to get there. So that strategy has been lost. And so for me, I'm encouraging the community to think about this midterm elections, and hopefully giving more power to the Democrats, and then also holding them accountable, coming out and turning out, without fear, and taking this fear in this moment, and channeling that energy into making sure that we are, voting and holding our elected officials accountable. So when we talk about, in the Congress level, I mean, we as state legislators, because we don't have a whole lot that we can do in terms of, legislating, ICE, because that's a federal jurisdiction. We have been pushing to make sure that our Congress folks on both sides of the aisle, make sure that they vote down additional funding for DHS, for ICE. And guess what? There were still, I think, 4 or 5 Democrats who voted for it. So yes, I appreciate that we want to focus on the Republican side, and targeting that certain amount of Republicans to join this side. But we also have our own rogue individuals within Congress who literally voted for additional funding for ICE and DHS. And so there's this, I think, work that the Democratic Party needs to do to make sure that we are speaking from one page, and that we are aligned in terms of messaging, and that has to come from the top. And as of right now, I feel like we don't have that central figure. Yes, we have key figures within the Democratic Party, but I feel like we don't have this central figure that is really bringing us together. And until we decide that we have to be on the same page, we have to be speaking the same language, we are going to see this fraction of the party. And the longer we are fractured, the longer we are divided, the longer it's going to take for us to fight back in a meaningful and strategic way.
Thank you so much, Representative. Yes, there were 7 Democrats, folks. If you live in the state of Texas, New York, Washington, Maine, and North Carolina, you need to go take a look, because your representatives voted to increase this bill towards DHS money, about $64 billion. Now, we understand with that the billions were already put there through that big, horrible, nasty bill when Democrats flipped so they can reopen the government. When we gave in then, it set up the stage for today. I hear them threatening another partial shutdown. We're at a very different level now. Different strategies are needed. This sitting on the sideline, like the Democrats do, being peaceful, that no longer works. I actually thought, Uhuru, that every Democrat should have gotten on a plane and gone to Minnesota. They should have been there standing shoulder to shoulder. Stop hiding out in your home, making all that money, and come out in the streets with us. I don't get that. So I'm going to come to you, Tanya, before I really start screaming and preaching up here. And instead, I want to move towards some strategies, and I want to let people know, if you have questions, put them in the chat as we move towards segment 3. Segment 3 is about strategies. I want to come to each person for their final comments, and then lay out for people, 3 or 4 things that they need to do. Folks, what we talk about on my radio show is that, it's about turning every environment into a freedom school. You should be on this conversation with your pen, your pencil, paper, because the only way we can fight the lies is we have to fight it with the truth. Not the truth as you see it, the truth as it is. Those are 2 different things, right? I know as professors, Uhuru and Walter, we know sometimes students have their own version of the truth. I'm like, that's your truth. That is not the truth. We want to focus on the truth, and you need to figure out how you're going to fight. If you are in Baltimore with me, we're already talking about how do we begin to organize, because we know we have something in this city that he wants. He said it last year. Fort McHenry's here. The place where they wrote the national anthem, the place that stood up, during the Revolutionary War. He wants to celebrate his 250th within what he calls a rat-infested city that only he can clean up. So we know in Baltimore, we make no mistakes about the fact that Baltimore is always on his mind and in his mouth. He just hasn't turned his limited attention to us yet. If you are in Philadelphia, you already know that he is coming to you. Like if you are in a blue city, in a blue state, and your mayor has stood up 10 toes down, he is coming for you, and he is sending his henchmen to do it. We understand that he can't be everywhere at all times, every single place, but neither could Hitler. But if you have people on the ground who are blindly following you, then you don't have to be everywhere. They get their marching orders and they go forward. How do we organize? And then I guess that point that I struggle with, Walter, is having to help people understand that during the civil rights movement, my dad said when they would leave to go march, they would tell their parents bye. I mean, you would give them that hug because you don't know if you're coming back home. I don't think people get that we're in that type of struggle, that type of Birmingham that was called Bombingham. That type of boots on the ground where you may or may not make it home. And if you do, you may be blinded from tear gas. You may lose your hearing from, bang guns. This is that moment when you have to say, what am I willing to give up? I'm sure Alex Preddy didn't start off with the struggle going, that was the day he was going to die. But he saw someone getting attacked and he immediately moved in as a nurse to offer aid, and lost his life in the process. So pulling all this together, I'll go first to Tanya, and then we'll make our way through. Tanya Clayhouse, CEO, Clayhouse Consulting, Senior Strategist for the African American Policy Forum.
All right, Kaye. So you just gave me a big list there. So I want to make sure that I'm responsive. So a few strategies. I want to step back a second and just say, look, I think we also need to play both the short game and the long game. This administration in Trump, he is itching for a fight. There is intentionality behind what is going on right now, between the sending of troops, obviously, to Democratic states and not Republican states. He is itching to be able to enact the Insurrection Act. We all know this. This is why there is a clarion call from elected officials and from those of us within the community, in the civil rights community, to actually say that we need to make sure that we understand the strategy and what it is that we need to do in order to not fall in to their game. And so, one, you need to understand and know your rights. As someone who also works and chairs the civil rights section of the National Bar Association, we've done know your rights trainings through the National Bar, making sure you understand what it is that you do have a right to under the Constitution, under the 14th Amendment, that your freedom of speech and the First Amendment, that these are the rights that we have to exercise, but also know how to deal with protests. Go to your different trainings, understand what it is if you're going to get into it. If you're going to engage in peaceful protesting, know how to do that, know how to record, understand how to de-escalate, learn how to to get that type of training. Those are specific things that you can do if you want to be involved and make sure that you are helping others. Number two, know the truth. Do not believe everything that pops up on your feed. All right. You need to make sure that you understand actually what is happening. Be educated. Don't rely upon everybody else to tell you. You find out what actually is going on and learn and understand what the truth really is, because unfortunately right now we cannot believe what is coming out of those mouths of those in the administration. And number three, you do need to be engaged. You need to be civically engaged, but not only dealing with what's happening in the midterm elections coming up right now, but also understanding your local elections, because those local officials, if we didn't have somebody, if we, our representative on the call right now, if we didn't have Attorney General Ellison, who I worked with personally, when he was here in Congress, if we didn't have people like that in the states, in their local communities that are actually holding ground, then we wouldn't even have the ability to bring certain lawsuits to ensure that we are protecting the rights and actually getting into and challenging what is happening, even with what is happening by the federal government in an attempt to run roughshod over our court system. So those are three things that I would suggest, and that we need to, again, do the long game and the short game, and understand what our ultimate goal is, and not be baited into something in which we're, capitulating our rights, and we're essentially, we're ceding ground because we don't fully understand and we don't get what the administration is trying to do, which is essentially create an authoritarianism regime and run roughshod over our Constitution. So please, there are things that you can do and take advantage of those opportunities and make sure that you are clear and educated about how to proceed.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I want to come to you, Uhuru, because I think people are also getting a little confused. And I say this very, very gently, right? So they're hearing the words that this is a dictator that is coming up. They're hearing autocracy. They're hearing about fascism. They're hearing about authoritarian regime. And if you have not had a complete study of all the different parts of this, then you don't get how it takes an oligarchy to lift up and centralize power in the hands of one person, who then has the weaponry to make that happen. And it becomes an authoritarian dictatorial ruler of a one-party government. And I think that because we don't do a very good job, and I'm not talking about we individually, but we collectively, of teaching about American government and about foreign policy in a way that our students can completely understand that democracy is a choice. It is not a right. It's something that you fight for and you have to massage. So can you talk a little bit, Uhuru, through that frame for us of what people can do to make sure they're ready to meet this moment?
I love that question, Dr. Kaye. And we saw this week in particular, all this conversation about the new Black Panther Party and their relationship to the old Black Panther Party. And I think in that moment, and this is how this connects to your question, people were celebrating an aspect of the party that was really about the guns and self-defense, when in fact people forget that one of the things that the Panthers implemented were political education classes. They understood the importance of making sure that people were educated and informed so they could take action, so they could really, in the way that Elaine Brown put it, move from those basic necessities to want some abstract thing called freedom. But that's really developed in the classroom, right? So before you pick up the gun, you have to pick up the books and really read and study and understand all the things that you talked about that are part and parcel of this drift toward and now sprint toward authoritarianism in our country. Having said that, for me, when I think about this moment, I wrote an editorial on MLK Day about Renee Good. And I think, in a very practical sense, and I'll share just part of this, I think people need to be good. And what I mean by that is literally taking that language. Mark Ruffalo was wearing a pin at an award ceremony that said, "Be good." But I literally want people to take each one of those letters and apply them in ways that I think could be very meaningful in this moment. Number one, be brave on purpose. Courage is a choice. And we saw that both with Alex and with Renee Nicole Good. But in our community, we know this intimately. It's the story of so many trailblazers in our history whom we celebrate, from Ella Baker to Angela Davis. So we really need to understand that. E is to exercise conscience, and to do so in a way that understands that, history doesn't often catch up. So we can't wait for permission to act. We have to act with a sense of immediacy and with integrity, because that's the work. The other ones, I think, speak specifically to Black history in a way that I think is important, given the work of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. That G is grapple with the truth, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Study history in a way that John Lewis talked about it when he said, ordinary people with extraordinary vision have the power to redeem the soul of America. But he said, studying the past is absolutely essential to developing that extraordinary vision. Oppose justice or injustice where you stand, because unjust systems thrive when ordinary people comply. That second O, offer humanity without apology, remembering that resilience born of compassion is not weakness, but the highest expression of empathy. The best way that we can be empathetic is showing up in community. Like tonight, getting together, talking, utilizing our talents in whatever area where we have influence and expertise to be part of a solution. And as educators in particular, taking that responsibility to figure out ways that we can share the scholarship, the teaching, the learnings that can amplify people's understanding and help them understand ways to resist and why we need to resist. And last but not least, and I think Dr. Kaye, Walter Grayson spoke to it earlier, but you are a model of this. We have to do the work consistently. This is what I love about Nikema Levy Armstrong. So many people, Tanya on this call, representative who's been incredible in this community, not just on this issue, but bringing the Black community and immigrant communities together. So when we do the work consistently, we do so because freedom is a constant struggle and justice is not achieved in a single act. It's sustained over time. So when we say we're going to be good, or we want people to be good, it's not a moral abstraction. It's actually a practice. So we need to practice those qualities every day. And that might be abstract and not concrete for people, but I do think it's something that you can wake up every day and say, this move toward justice, to being engaged, to being authentically human is a practice. Practice makes perfect.
Thank you so much, Dr. Uhuru Williams, Professor of History from the University of St. Thomas, St. Paul. I'm going to come to you, Walter, because what I was thinking about when Uhuru laid everything out, and I love that idea of be good. I did see the pen because they asked Mark Ruffalo, like, is this such a great party? I think he was being interviewed by a Black reporter. He's like, look, dude, I mean, parties happen all the time. People are dying in the street, and we really have to think about that. So two things I want to bring to the conversation for your final comment, Walter. I've been talking to people on my show, and I said, look, fascism does not begin with a bang. It begins with a whisper. It is in the small things they do every day. I said, and the inverse of that is democracy should not end with a whisper. It has to end with a bang. Like, we're actually going to have to make that stand. And when Uhuru mentioned Mark Ruffalo, what came up is what I use as a teaching tool for my students. I go to that scene, and I'm going to talk about the Avengers because I know, Walter, you will get the reference. But in Avengers, when they were all on the ground, right, and all five of them were standing, it was like, this is where we make our stand. And then he sent everybody off to the areas that spoke to their talents and their abilities. You go to the sky, you just crush, you stand here. I use that because young people can get that visual representation of what does it mean to say, you know what, this is where we're going to make our stand. And once we decide to make a stand together, then we all go to where our talents are best used. So Walter, I want to talk to you about the courage it takes to make a stand. And then how do you mobilize people to be about the work every day? Because this is not like a one and done type of struggle that we're in now.
No, as everybody on this conversation has said, this is a multi-layered and a long commitment. This is not something where we win just tomorrow morning or next week or next month. This will go through this year and next year and probably for years to come, making advances to push this back. So yeah, the Avengers piece, it's a great metaphor. Of course, I'm much more into Wakanda and the way the Black Panther and the way that his troops assign and were the difference, in fact, how they were able to hold off ultimate disaster. But that whole piece means we have to know who we are, what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, and how we can contribute. And so at the one level, it's being informed. And a lot of my work the last 2 weeks is about how do people find reliable information. They find it with you, Dr. Kaye. They find it with the folks like Al McFarland here on KFAI, who does this work in the Twin Cities. They find it by going online, and I did some work in LA with KBLA and the Black Pack. And so looking for independent journalism investigative journalism, really crucial. Don't rely on your broadcast CBS, ABC folks. Don't rely on your cable news. I don't care if it's Fox or CNN or anybody else. Look to folks who are actually involved, and that's how you get the best information. If you don't know where to find them, hit my Instagram page, Walter D. Grayson. All I've been doing is storing and circulating reliable info for the last month. And so beyond being informed, you got to stay involved. And so the biggest thing I think any of us can do that I've seen us do well here in Minnesota is know the people on your block, know your neighbors well, stay in contact with each other. You don't have to get out to every vigil and every protest and go out and do all the things that every activist does. But staying connected is how you stay involved so that you make the best decisions for yourself and keep yourself in the best situation where you'll survive this. You'll move forward and get to the right place by the time this comes to an end. So informed and involved. And my one thing I'll say to our distinguished panel, I've just finished a project. Dr. Williams knows about it. We worked for 3 years in New Jersey, which is now coming under increasing assault across 50 different small cities. But we did a project called For Such a Time as This. It's a free resource about the history of civil rights struggle in that state. But then it's also a policy agenda. It also lays out 30 pages of ways to improve so we don't come to this moment again. We need a report like that here in Minnesota. And so to move forward here, I know New York is doing similar work, but we can do this right now as community leaders in our own right to build a template. Most people don't know Minnesota history very well, especially Minnesota civil rights history. We've got to teach it. We've got to build the agenda that when we come out of this moment, and frankly, builds on our strength with the political parties in this state to say we're going to build a different kind of state where everybody enjoys the best of what we provide. So I would say look at that report. It's free online, New Jersey Institute of Social Justice, For Such a Time as This. Download the PDF and we can build a better future for every state.
Thank you so much, Walter Grayson. I'm smiling because I knew that when I brought up what was going on in the Avengers, he was going to bring up Wakanda. He compiled the Wakanda syllabus. So I know if I mention Mark Ruffalo and the Hulk, I know he's going to bring in the incredible work that the Black Panther offers for us with this Afrofuturism view for how we can imagine a better world where Black folks have all the things we've been fighting. So I appreciate that. He's also, as folks know, a professor of history. He's at Macalester College of St. Paul. I want to end by going to our representative here from Minnesota State, District 38A, if I'm not mistaken. So can you talk about perhaps what you're doing and what's happening in the Minnesota State House to prepare yourselves for what's going forward? Because we've already heard the lies every time they talk. It is nothing but another lie. It's like they're convinced that we're not going to believe our eyes, that we're going to believe their lies. And I'm telling people, stop second guessing yourself. We know what we are seeing. And people now have to see 42 angles before they believe the truth of what this moment offers. So what can we expect from the representatives in their work to stand with Governor Walz at this moment?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we are looking at this, at least from where I'm standing from. You talked about the 3 strategies, and from an elected position, we are going to be very vocal about, the misinformation that is going out. Our party has tried really hard to make sure that we are putting out the right information. We are, promoting advocacy groups and individuals who are out here doing the work that independent journalism, as my brother has talked about. So from our end, we've had many conversations, not only with the governor, but, with each other in our caucus to talk about what does 2026 look like, right? What are some of the bills? What are some of the ideas that are actually coming from the community? And we have been intentional about going out into community and talking about, what are checking the temperature on the ground and having conversations, about the long-term strategy. I think my sister talked about the long-term strategy, and we can't, yes, it's important that we take care of the immediate need right now of the people, but also think about that long-term strategy. And that long-term strategy has to be rooted in strategic, calculated, and informed and inclusive policies and the work that we will be doing moving forward. And as you're aware, where, you know, our state has been, our state has always led in many of these things. And we are unique in the sense that, especially right now in this time, you know, we have a tight house, you know. And so 2026, we are looking at certain bills that are, you know, addressing obviously ICE and immigration. And then we are also tackling the gun violence piece, as you are very much aware of what has been going on this last year around gun violence. And so for us, we are standing here with our governor, with our law enforcement, to say, number one, the three strategies: protecting people, right? From an elected official's perspective, we must make sure that we are protecting our schools, clinics, workplaces, and houses of worship by enforcing clear rules, making sure that they know what their rights are, you know, making sure that they demand, you know, warrants, and not just any kind of warrants, judicial warrants, and ensuring that the public safety serves the people and not fear, right? But then when you look on the other side of the coin, the people must make sure that we are looking out for one another. And we've been so proud to be representing Minnesotans, because we've continued to show that, you know, shared, you know, we continue to share verified information and making sure that families know their rights and where to go. So ultimately, you know, government must protect the people, and the people must protect each other, right? So the second part of that, the second strategy, I think, when I think about, you know, how are we going to continue, you know, fighting this, is defend the rule of law. You know, as an immigrant coming from Kenya and being literally 48 hours away from being deported from this country, and now 22 years later, you know, being elected as the first Kenyan elected into the Minnesota state, Kenyan American elected into the Minnesota state legislature, you know, I still believe in the rule of law. I still believe in this democracy. I still believe in this American dream. And so from that perspective, we as elected officials must hold every agency accountable, insist on due process. Yes, we are seeing, you know, this administration undermine that by kicking our state law enforcement out of the process. But we must fight to make sure that we as a state have a seat at the table, especially in these investigations, and refusing unlawful or secret, you know, actions that are putting our communities in danger. That's why we are out here protesting, you know, the actions of this current administration. And from the people's perspective, you know, we must, you know, document, like my sister talked about, making sure that we are taking care of ourselves when we are out there protesting, you know, document abuses safely, demand transparency, and use our voices to push, you know, leaders to do what is right. You know, and I know that AG's office and a couple of advocacy groups have a way of, you know, making sure that you are able to, you know, get this information to them, because that's helping them, you know, file these lawsuits, these very meaningful lawsuits. So for me, no one is above the law, you know, not the federal government, and obviously not any of us, because we are always held against the law, you know. And then lastly, you know, the strength of the community. You know, as elected officials, we have to make sure that we are intentional about investing in our mental health. Each one of you can attest that, you know, we are going through, you know, a very difficult time. And I'm afraid that our mental health as a people, as a state, as a country, you know, we are only going to see an increase in that. And so for me, you know, going into the 2026 legislative session, I've made it a priority to invest and to push for more funding for mental health. You know, legal support, you know, making sure that there is legal support for many of these family members who cannot afford legal support. So I really appreciate, give a shout out to all of those legal professionals who are out here just providing pro bono services to families who are really struggling right now. Making sure that our small businesses, you know, we are seeing a decline, you know, in our small businesses. I was doing a small business visits the last 2-3 weeks. You know, some of them are shutting down. Some of them have seen a decline up to 50% in their business. You know, how do we continue to push for that? And then trusted community partners and how we support them from a legislative perspective. From the people side, you know, we need to continue to show up. So I encourage Minnesotans, continue to show up, continue to stand up, continue to stand in solidarity with each other. You know, let's support local organizations who are doing amazing work. If you don't know what to do, give your money, if you have that, to local organizations and donate, because there's a lot of local organizations, you know, who are doing amazing work. For example, ACER here in my district that is providing rental assistance and food distributions, and you name it. it, and then refuse to let fear divide us, by race, faith, or immigration status. We answer fear with community, and we continue to do that. And if you allow me, if this is the last time I'm going to speak, allow me to speak on this. And this goes out to your very wide audience that you have. And that goes beyond just the African American community. This message goes out to the African immigrants in this country. We have a powerful and necessary role in this fight of justice, especially because our presence in this country is not just, part of a long story of Black struggle for dignity, safety, and freedom. We benefit from the hard-earned, won gains of the civil rights movement, voting rights, fair housing, working workplace protections, due process, all of that. We have benefited from that because of the struggle. And so we also carry a responsibility to learn the history and honor it through action, and not just sit back and say, well, this is not our fight. Well, guess what, you guys? This is our fight. They are targeting us. They're targeting all of us. So educating ourselves about Black history helps us, understand today's attacks on immigrants, number one, on Black communities, and on civil rights, come from the same system of fear and control, and are truly safe. If any of us are targeted, then we all are targeted. So our role is to stand in solidarity with Black Americans, speaking out when injustice happens, organize within our communities, educate ourselves, and use our power, our voices, Wakanda, our culture, faith spaces, and civil power to defend human dignity. Because justice is not something that we borrow from others. It's something that we must help carry forward. And I know that when we talk about the unity of the Black people in this country, that's a conversation for another day. And I know you've had this conversation time and time again, but I am applauding, I'm calling the African American community to not sit on the sideline, to not just sit here and expect to, ride in the coattails of everybody who's out here doing the work. And with that, it has been a pleasure being a part of this conversation today.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure having all of you. Thank you, each and every one of you. It's very obvious that we are in a very serious moment, that we are planting seeds for trees that will never give us shade. My hope is that history will remember how we made a stand and how we pushed back. Thank you. And I want to bring up Sylvia Cyrus, the executive director of ASALH, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. She is the longest serving executive director outside of Carter G. Woodson, who founded the organization. So Sylvia, I want to come to you for the last 5 minutes or so. We know we have a lot going on, and I'm excited to be the national president at this moment of ASALH, but I come to you because we are only 1 week away from celebrating a century of Black history commemoration. Now, you haven't been around for the entire century, but you can help us to frame what's going to happen throughout this month. So, Sylvia, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kaye, and thank you for everyone joining this evening. Information on the exciting events that we have been preparing can be found on the ASALH website, asalh.org, on ASALH TV, our YouTube channel, and through our social media. So just go to our website. If you don't catch all the details, I'm going to try to run through it quickly, but we need you there. In 1926, Dr. Woodson institutionalized Negro History Week. For 100 years, ASALH has led this charge in what is now Black History Month. We celebrate and commemorate the history that has been researched, preserved, and promoted across this country and the world. And we have some great events that are coming up that are going to educate, that are going to really help pull together what you need in terms of the foundation to do the work that we heard about this evening. In Minnesota, we need an ASALH branch in your state. Join Dr. Greason and others to make sure that ASALH has a presence there. So hit them up on social media. But we need more ASALH branches across this nation doing this great work. So what about our events? Our first national convening of 2026 is going to kick off Black History Month on February 1st at 6 p.m. This is a discussion that will be narrated and will be moderated by our national president, Dr. Kaye. And joining her will be Kimberly Crenshaw of the African American Policy Forum, Dr. Darrell Michael Scott, the former president of ASALH and the chair of the History and Geography Department at Morgan State University. Burtis English, the editor of the Journal of African American History at Alabama State University. This is a live digital event and you will love it. It will start at 6 p.m. Then we go to February 3rd, where we'll have the scholar Xavier Frank from 6 p.m. to 5 p.m. do a talk on justice and reconciliation from Henry Highland Garnett to Harvey Johnson. We're moving right on along to February 11th. Again, 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central, a labor and of freedom then and now with the Movement History Initiative. Judy Richardson, a filmmaker, Emily Crosby from SUNY, Hassan Jeffries from Ohio State, Christina Thompson for the Center of Civil Rights History and Research will do a great panel discussion on the 11th. On February 17th, the winner of the Asala Book Prize, that committee chaired by Karen Cook Bell of Bowie State University, and a wonderful group of jurors have selected from way over 75 books to come up with a winner. That event will be at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. You'll want to join us on Asala TV YouTube there. On February 18th at 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central, and of course, for our folks on the West Coast, we know you have to do a little bit of calculating in terms of the time, but we're going to have a discussion on a very, very important subject, the state of African American historical and cultural preservation. Vivian Glover of South Carolina Historical Commission, Kaye Asset Amen from the Maryland Commission of African American Culture, and Ann Bailey of the New York State African American Commission will have a very, very important and engaging conversation there. And then nationally, we're going to end the month on February 28th with two outstanding events. First is free and open to the public starting at 10 o'clock a.m. We will have an author's book signing. Come on out and purchase books, meet with authors, fellowship with us before we go into the 100th annual Black History Month luncheon, where we will have a dynamic talk by our own Dr. Kaye, our national president. You can go online to see all of these great events that we've talked about. And in addition, online, you're going to see the events that are over 40 branches across this country are planning in their own local areas for Black History Month. We need your support. We need you to attend these events. We need you to join Asala. Make that your Black History Month thing to do this year, is to join or renew your dues with Asala and join a branch of Asala. That's where the work is done. That's where you have a lot of fun, rubbing shoulders of other individuals who are interested in this work as well. So remember, asala.org. We're here. We're doing the work. We need your help. We look forward to commemorating 100 years of Black history with you starting February 1st.
Thank you so much, Sylvia Cyrus. Folks, I want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of Conversations with Dr. Kaye. Whenever we have a time, we will definitely jump on here and continue the conversation. Make it a point to join us next Sunday as we kick off a century of Black history commemorations. I'm going to end with something that Uhuru Williams put on the table in that poem by Langston Hughes, America has never been America to me. He ends by saying, but I swear America will be. We have to do the work. We have to take a stand. We have to use our talents, love on each other, be as good as possible. But remember what Kimberly Crenshaw said, fear is contagious, but so is courage. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve you in your way. Thank you so much.